On the morning of the 26th of July, 1815, a young woman stood on the scaffold outside Newgate Prison, dressed in the white muslin gown she had intended to wear on her wedding day. Her name was Eliza Fenning. She was 20 years old. She was a cook, and she was about to die for a plate of dumplings. "Before the just and almighty God," she said, her voice steady above the murmur of 40,000 onlookers, "and by the faith of the Holy Sacrament I have taken, I am innocent of the offense with which I am charged." Moments later, the trapdoor fell. She died, it was reported, almost without writhing. The crowd erupted not in satisfaction, but in rage. This is a story about flour and arsenic, about a girl who could read and write and a society that punished her for it, about a kitchen in Chancery Lane and the monstrous machinery of Regency justice. This is the story that helped give birth to investigative journalism in England. And it begins, as so many tragedies do, with a family sitting down to dinner. You are listening to Soils of Crime. If this story moves you, take a moment, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now. Let us build something together. Elizabeth Fenning was born around 1792 or 1793, most likely in the island of Dominica in the West Indies, though the exact circumstances of her birth were later disputed and embellished by both her defenders and her detractors. Her father, William Fenning, was a Suffolk man who had served in the 1st Battalion of the 15th Regiment of Infantry, rising to the rank of non-commissioned officer before taking his discharge around 1802 with a certificate of good character. Her mother was a native of Cork in Ireland. Both parents were Protestant. They came to London when Eliza was still a child, and William found work with his brother, a potato dealer in Red Lion Street, Holborn. Later he served in a potato warehouse in Red Lion Passage, where his honest conduct satisfied 3 successive proprietors. Her mother worked for the same upholsterer for 5 years. They were decent, unremarkable, industrious people. They had 10 children. All died young except Eliza. She was the last. She was their darling. From the age of 14, Eliza worked in domestic service, moving through various households as cook or general servant. She was described as petite, lively, amiable, and unusually intelligent for her station. She could read and write fluently, a fact that would later be weaponized against her. She was engaged to be married. She had, by every credible account, no criminal history, no history of violence, and no particular grudge against anyone. In the last week of January 1815, she entered the service of Orlebar Turner, a law stationer operating at number 68 Chancery Lane, London. The Turner household was a modest professional establishment. Orlebar Turner, the elder, lived at Lambeth but visited frequently. His son, Robert Gregson Turner, ran the business from Chancery Lane, where he lived with his wife Charlotte. The household also included a housemaid named Sarah Peer and 2 apprentices, Roger Gadsden and Thomas King. They dealt in vellum and parchment, the raw materials of legal London. It was respectable work. It was not wealthy work, and beneath the orderly surface of the household, tensions were simmering that would shortly destroy a life. About 3 weeks after Eliza arrived, Charlotte Turner discovered her in the apprentice's room late one evening, partly undressed. Eliza explained she had gone in to borrow a candle. Charlotte interpreted it differently. She accused Eliza of impropriety, threatened her with dismissal, and reprimanded her severely the following morning. Eliza, mortified, told Sarah Peer she no longer liked her mistress but appeared to let the matter drop. Charlotte, however, did not forget, nor did Sarah Peer. According to later testimony, both women had taken a dislike to the cook. That dislike would prove fatal. The critical day was Tuesday, the 21st of March, 1815. Eliza had repeatedly asked Charlotte for permission to make yeast dumplings, a dish she considered herself skilled at preparing. Charlotte had put her off, preferring the convenience of bought dough from the baker. But on the Monday, a brewer delivered some yeast to the house, yeast that Eliza had apparently requested on her own initiative. Charlotte relented. On Tuesday morning, she agreed that Eliza might make dumplings for the family's dinner at 3 o'clock, along with a beefsteak pie for the apprentices who dined at 2. This is the moment the prosecution would later seize upon. The cook, the kitchen, and the yeast she had personally arranged. But there is nothing inherently suspicious about a cook wanting to cook. And the flour she used was the same flour from which she made the beefsteak pie crust, the pie that was eaten by the servants and apprentices without any ill effect. Charlotte gave Eliza instructions. Mix the dough with milk and water. Make the pie first, carry it to the baker, then knead the dumplings. Eliza complied. She carried the pie to the baker's shop before noon, returned, and began working the dough. Charlotte checked in around 12:30 and found the dough set by the fire to rise. She noted something odd. The dough did not rise. It sat heavy and dark, retaining a singular shape. She told Eliza. Eliza said it would rise before she wanted it. It never did. At 3 o'clock, 6 dumplings were brought to the table. Charlotte remarked to Sarah Peer that they were black and heavy instead of white and light. Nevertheless, the family ate them. Orlebar Turner the elder, who had come to dine with his son that day, took his share. Robert Gregson Turner ate a dumpling and a half. Charlotte ate less than a quarter of one. Eliza herself ate the dumplings in the kitchen. And Roger Gadsden, one of the apprentices, wandered into the kitchen after his own dinner and picked at the leftovers, a dumpling and a half remaining on a plate. He later claimed that Eliza warned him not to eat them, saying they were cold and heavy and would do him no good. Within minutes, the household collapsed. Charlotte was seized with excruciating pain, violent vomiting, swelling of the head, tongue, and chest. Robert Turner staggered downstairs, his eyes grotesquely swollen. The elder Turner was overcome with heat across his stomach. Gadsden fell ill on his way to fetch Mrs. Margaret Turner from Lambeth. And Eliza, in the kitchen, was retching and in agony. All 5 had been poisoned. A surgeon named John Marshall was summoned and arrived at the house around 8:45 that evening. He found everyone suffering symptoms consistent, he later asserted, with arsenic. Everyone survived. Whatever they had consumed, the dose was not lethal. But suspicion had already crystallized, and it pointed at the cook. Here we must pause and consider the forensic reality of 1815. There was no reliable chemical test for arsenic. The famous Marsh test would not be developed until 1836. What John Marshall did was primitive even by the standards of his own era. The following morning, at Orlebar Turner's direction, Marshall took the pan in which the dumplings had been mixed, added warm water from a kettle, stirred it, let it settle, and decanted the liquid. At the bottom he found half a teaspoon of white powder. He declared it arsenic. His method of identification was that it tarnished a knife. He examined the yeast and the flour and found no arsenic in either. That was the entirety of the forensic evidence. The Newgate Calendar, in its account of the case, calculated the absurdity. If half a teaspoon of arsenic, weighing approximately 50 grains, was found in the tiny residue of dough clinging to a mixing pan, and if the arsenic had been kneaded uniformly through the dough as it would be, then the total quantity of arsenic distributed across all 6 dumplings would have been approximately 1,800 grains. 5 grains of arsenic is sufficient to kill a human being. Charlotte Turner's quarter dumpling alone would have contained enough to kill 10 people. Robert Turner's portion would have killed 120. The quantity consumed by all 5 victims would, by this reasoning, have destroyed 360 human beings. Yet nobody died. The arithmetic alone should have acquitted Eliza Fenning. It did not. Orlebar Turner reported that he kept arsenic in an unlocked drawer in the office where the apprentices worked. Wrapped in 2 papers clearly labeled arsenic, deadly poison, used for killing the mice that gnawed at his vellum and parchment. He said he had last seen it on the 7th of March, about 2 weeks before the poisoning, and that it had since gone missing. The drawer also held scrap paper used for lighting fires, a task that fell to Eliza. The implication was transparent. She had seen the arsenic. She could read the label. She had taken it. On the 23rd of March, Eliza was arrested by William Thistleton, an officer from Hatton Garden, and charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. She was examined before a magistrate on the 30th of March and committed for trial at the Old Bailey. Her parents were kept in the dark. On the night of the poisoning, Eliza had sent Sarah Peer to fetch her father. Sarah told William Fenning only that Eliza wanted to see him, said nothing about the illness, and the message slipped his mind. When he did come to Chancery Lane that evening, Sarah told him a barefaced lie. On her mistress's orders, she said Eliza had gone out on an errand. He went away. His daughter was lying in agony downstairs. He did not learn of her plight until she was already in prison. The trial took place on the 11th of April, 1815, before Sir John Sylvester, the Recorder of London. Sylvester was known in legal London as Black Jack. He had a reputation as a hanging judge, particularly harsh on female defendants. There were persistent rumors that he solicited sexual favors from women in exchange for mercy. He was not a man inclined toward doubt. The prosecution, led by a Mr. Gurney, built its case on circumstance. Charlotte Turner testified to the apprentice's room incident, Eliza's subsequent sullenness, her insistence on making dumplings, the odd behavior of the dough, and the illness that followed. Orlebar Turner testified about the missing arsenic. Roger Gadsden testified that Eliza had warned him away from eating the dumplings, a fact the prosecution interpreted as proof of guilty knowledge rather than simple concern about heavy food. Sarah Peer testified that Eliza had said she no longer liked her master and mistress. But the prosecution was riddled with problems that a competent defense might have exposed. The Turners' personal solicitor also served as clerk to the magistrate who had committed Eliza, a staggering conflict of interest. All the prosecution witnesses came from the same household, had conferred before trial, and sat in court listening to each other's testimony. Charlotte Turner and Sarah Peer both swore that no coal delivery had occurred on the 21st of March. A claim later proved false after Eliza's execution, when the coal merchant and his delivery men confirmed that coals had indeed been delivered that day. Received by Eliza, meaning other. People had been in and out of the kitchen, and then there was the matter of Eliza's defense, or rather the catastrophic absence of one. In 1815, defendants in felony trials could not be represented by counsel in the modern sense. Eliza's parents scraped together £5, 2 guineas of which went to a barrister named Mr. Alley, the rest to a solicitor who prepared a brief. Mr. Alley barely spoke during the trial. He left the courtroom before the recorder's summing up. Eliza was permitted to speak for herself and said, "My lord, I am truly innocent of all the charge, as God is my witness. I am innocent. Indeed I am. I liked my place. I was very comfortable. As to my master saying I did not assist him, I was too ill. I had no concern with the drawer at all. When I wanted a piece of paper, I always asked for it." She begged for Thomas King, the other apprentice, to be called as a witness, insisting he would confirm she never went to the drawer without asking. The recorder refused. "Too late," he said. Her father, William Fenning, distraught and trembling, stepped into the witness box to deliver a sworn statement that his daughter had told him she was happy in her situation. The recorder waved him away. He could not hear him. It was too late. He must go down. The summing up was devastating. Sylvester directed the jury toward guilt with scarcely disguised contempt for the defendant. If poison had been given even to a dog, he told them, one would suppose that common humanity would have prompted us to assist it in its agonies. Here is the case of a master and mistress being both poisoned, and no assistance was offered. He did not mention that Eliza herself had been violently ill. The jury deliberated for minutes. Guilty. Death. Aged 20. Eliza was carried from the dock convulsed with agony, uttering frightful screams. If you have stayed with me this far, you are the kind of listener Soils of Crime was made for. Drop a comment. Tell me, does Eliza's story remind you of injustice you have seen in your own time? The weeks that followed were extraordinary. Public opinion fractured along lines of class and politics. The liberal press championed Eliza. The conservative press condemned her. The Examiner printed her letters from Newgate in full. William Hone, a radical journalist and defender of press freedom, began gathering evidence. Basil Montagu, a prominent Quaker barrister, uncovered a devastating fact. Robert Gregson Turner had a history of mental instability. In September or October prior to the poisoning, he had appeared at a chemist's shop in Holborn, wild and deranged, begging to be put under restraint, declaring that otherwise he would destroy himself and his wife. Montagu presented this evidence to Sylvester. The recorder dismissed it as wholly useless. An anonymous chemist conducted his own experiments. He made dumplings with arsenic. The arsenic had no effect on whether they rose. He contaminated dumplings secretly after a cook had prepared them. No one noticed any change in appearance. He visited the Turners, attempting to persuade Orlebar Turner to sign a petition in Eliza's favor. He was making progress when Sylvester himself arrived at the house and, backed by Robert Turner, convinced the elder Turner not to sign. The Recorder of London was personally intervening to block a clemency petition. This was not justice. This was a siege. On the 22nd of July, 4 days before the scheduled execution, an extraordinary meeting took place at the Home Office. Lord Sidmouth, the Home Secretary, was absent. The Lord Chancellor, Lord Eldon, the Recorder, and Under Secretary Becket deliberated. They concluded there was no reason to interfere. Lord Eldon, reportedly troubled, summoned a second meeting that evening. The same result. Whatever doubts existed at the highest levels of government were not enough to save a 20-year-old cook from Holborn. Eliza spent her final days in the condemned cell at Newgate. She wrote letters. To a fellow condemned prisoner, the 24-year-old William Oldfield, convicted of raping a child. To a man named Charles, who had helped her draft petitions. She sent locks of her hair to attendants. She wrote to her former employers, the Turners, accusing Charlotte of knowing more about the arsenic than she admitted and of having an affair with the apprentice Thomas King. On the 24th of July, she said goodbye to her parents. The parting scene with her mother, wrote William Hone, who documented every detail, was heartrending. They were separated from each other in a state of dreadful agony. On the morning of the 26th, she rose at 4, washed carefully, and dressed in the white muslin gown and cap, with a pair of pale lilac boots laced in front. It was her wedding outfit. Her arms were bound with cord. The noose was placed around her neck, the free end wound around her waist. She walked through the passages of Newgate to the scaffold, where she was the first to ascend. The hangman, John Langley, had arrived late, delayed by an execution in Ipswich the day before. He fumbled. He tried to draw a white cotton nightcap over Eliza's head but could not fit it over her muslin cap. He tried a muslin handkerchief. Too small. Finally, he pulled out his own dirty pocket handkerchief and tied it over her face. Eliza, standing pinioned on the scaffold before the largest crowd of the year, recoiled. "Pray do not let him put it on, Mr. Cotton," she begged the prison chaplain. "Pray make him take it off." "My dear, it must be on," Cotton replied. "He must put it on." She stood in silence, praying, while Oldfield and a third man, Abraham Adams, convicted of sodomy, were prepared beside her. Oldfield smiled at the crowd and told Eliza that all was well in God. At approximately 8:40 in the morning, the pin was withdrawn. The trap fell. Eliza Fenning died, almost without writhing, at 20 years of age. Oldfield was greatly convulsed. Adams appeared to die instantly. Among the vast crowd was William Hone. He had been carried there by the press of bodies against his will. "I got into an immense crowd," he wrote later. "I had the greatest horror of witnessing an execution, and of this particular execution, a young girl of whose guilt I had grave doubts. But I could not help myself. I was closely wedged in. She was brought out. I saw nothing, but I heard all. I heard her protesting her innocence. I heard the prayer. I could hear no more. I stopped my ears and knew nothing else till I found myself in the dispersing crowd." Eliza's parents had to pay 14 shillings and 6 pence in executioner's fees before they could claim her body. They had to borrow the money. Her only possession, a Bible, was bequeathed to her mother. On the 31st of July, she was buried at St. George the Martyr near Brunswick Square. The pall was borne by 6 young girls dressed in white. As many as 10,000 people joined the funeral procession. Every window along the route was thronged with faces. There was not room inside the church. And then came the reckoning. A mob of more than 1,000 gathered outside the Turner's house in Chancery Lane, hooting and hissing. Police from Bow Street were stationed outside for days. 2 men were arrested for riotous behavior. Crowds of hundreds continued to assemble with an intention of doing mischief, but eventually the protesters dispersed and no serious damage was done. William Hone, commissioned by the publisher John Watkins, began his investigation in earnest. What he produced was a 240-page book titled The Important Results of an Elaborate Investigation into the Mysterious Case of Elizabeth Fenning. Widely regarded as a landmark in the history of investigative journalism, Hone proved that the official sessions report of the trial was riddled with omissions. He documented Sylvester's extraordinary personal intervention to block clemency petitions. He exposed the suppression of evidence about Robert Turner's mental instability. He demolished the forensic testimony, showing that Marshall's claim that arsenic blackens knives was simply untrue. He argued that Eliza had been executed to send a message to the servant class, writing all the masters and mistresses of families whose credulity or idleness rendered them proper subjects for alarums, were excessively devoted to the vociferous execration of the wickedness of servants. The establishment fought back viciously. The Observer published smears claiming the Fennings were Irish Catholics, that they had exhibited Eliza's body for money, that William Fenning had coached his daughter to protest her innocence to preserve his own reputation. These lies were printed on handbills, pushed through letterboxes, and pasted in shop windows. Marshall and his colleague Ogilvy claimed that Eliza had refused medical treatment because she knew her plan had failed. She would much rather die than live, they said, as life was of no consequence to her. But the truth, as it does, continued to surface. In 1829, the Morning Journal reported that a son of Orlebar Turner had died in Ipswich workhouse, confessing on his deathbed that he had placed the arsenic in the dumplings. John Gordon Smith, the University of London's first professor of medical jurisprudence, noted this claim in a publication that same year. Robert Gregson Turner was indeed living in Ipswich by 1820, and both he and his brother appear on the borough's electoral roll. Whether the deathbed confession was genuine remains a matter of historical debate, but it hangs over the case like a shadow that will not lift. Orlebar Turner was declared bankrupt in 1825. Samuel Parr and Charles Dickens believed in Eliza's innocence. Hone himself went on to face 3 trials for blasphemous libel in 1817, all of which he won, further cementing his reputation as a champion of press freedom. He died in 1842. Dickens attended his funeral. And Eliza Fenning? Her grave at St. George the Martyr was presumably moved in 1899 when the churchyard's interments were relocated to Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey. Whether her resting place is still identifiable is unknown. What survives is the record, the Old Bailey transcript, the Newgate calendar's meticulous commentary, Hone's devastating investigation, the image of a young woman in a white wedding dress, standing on a scaffold with a dirty handkerchief over her face, saying her last words to a God she believed would vindicate her. She was a cook from Holborn. She had 10 siblings, all dead. She could read and write. She was engaged to be married. She made dumplings that did not rise. And for that, the state of England took her life on a summer morning in 1815, while Napoleon was being transported to St. Helena and the Congress of Vienna was redrawing the map of Europe. Nobody redrew the map of Eliza Fenning's life. Nobody gave her back the years she did not live, the wedding she did not have, the children she did not bear. Her story was buried under 2 centuries of legal footnotes and class anxiety. But here, tonight, you have heard her name. You know what was done, and that, perhaps, is the only justice left. This has been Soils of Crime. If Eliza's story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss another voice from the silence of history, and tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? I want to know. Until next time, walk gently over the soils of crime.